A dramatic dawn had broken over the mountaintop hollow where sits our homestead, and before the sun was even up, I was getting ready to go out to one of the primary feeding stations, intent on solving a riddle that had emerged over the last couple weeks. The homestead is 1.25 miles long, and I had set several feeding stations round about it. But of all of them, one, and only one, was always entirely empty every time I returned to that feeding station. Blue and Jay were up with the dawn naturally, and were in the course of carrying about their daily escapades as I hiked the 200 meters from the cottage to the feeding site. They are curious birds, keenly observing the world around them, as well as my goings and comings. But they weren't suspects. I knew Blue and Jay, all by themselves, could not possibly be emptying the 8 ounces of seed I was putting into the feeding station every day. I was even privileged to sight one of the snowshoe hares who lives in the area. They're tricky to sight because they almost perfectly blend into the background. But hares don't climb, so they were not suspects. They could not possibly reach the feeding station. At the site, all was still and quiet, just like it usually is, and the boughs of conifer and deciduous tree alike had been covered overnight with the new fallen snow. Everything was white and pure and perfect, and smelled of pine, spruce, and the distant scent of ancient apples still on the tree. And in those trees, tricked into budding early by a rogue warm day, now and then a spruce grouse could be spotted feeding on the immature and frozen buds. But while spruce grouse themselves are also interesting birds, I knew that no grouse was the culprit behind the daily emptying of the feeder at the observatory. As I hiked, there was the music of myriad birds awakening with the dawn, as well as other wildlife, and I paused for a bit to observe the tap-tap-tapping of the stouty woodpecker as he looked for his morning's breakfast. The increasing activities of birds and the sounds of species that I haven't heard in a while tell me that some are beginning to come back in anticipation of spring, and others that may have had different behavioral habits are once again becoming active. And black-capped chickadees, a ubiquitous sight summer and winter, must be becoming more familiar with me. They don't visit the feeders all that much, so it's not as if they're drawn to me just because I feed them. But where, when I initially began this project, they would keep their distance, now they often come as close to a mere foot from me as I hike down the trail. They are amazing little birds, weighing in at under half an ounce, and they require only about 10 calories per day. Yet that number, so small to us, is quite large to them, and they must eat a significant percentage of their own body weight daily in order to survive, especially during the winter cold, so that they can have enough energy to metabolize and see them through the nights. Studies have shown that setting out feeders for them can as much as double their winter survival rates. As I hiked to the observatory, I pondered again what could possibly be emptying the feeders. Ravens would frankly be too big to get up on it, though I have seen them once or twice, feeding on the seeds that fell below. And I ruled out birds of prey such as eagles and the various grouse and pheasants of the area, as there weren't really any trails to support their activity. Red squirrels like this little guy seemed to be the most likely culprit, but frankly, there were no tracks like these leading over to the feeder. But one way or the other, I was going to resolve this mystery, and this time I came with a secret weapon. I own a half-dozen trail cameras that I use to monitor wildlife. They all need to be updated with newer models with better sensors and optics, but in terms of helping me figure out what's out and about, they do the job. I set up the trail cam, refilled the bird feeder, and went on my way. And the next day, what should appear but blue jays, and more blue jays, and more blue jays. Only one pair that I called Blue and Jay, and one other blue jay had I ever seen over at the feeder. But apparently, when they thought I wasn't around, they were coming in flocks. Somehow, the blue jays seemed to have shared word that there was plenty of food abundant at this feeder. But it was 4 days ago that I realized one morning when I woke up and went outside to go split some firewood that the blue jays had learned to associate me with food. And not just Blue and Jay who saw me regularly, but other blue jays. Because in the trees all around the cottage, half a dozen of them were perched and watching me. When I saw this, I forgot about the firewood, went back inside, gathered a camera and a new container of feed, and started out to the observatory. And as I went, I noticed the blue jays flying from treetop to treetop, never coming all that close, but not really shy either, as they had been when I first started the bird project. In fact, when I reached the observatory, there were several in the trees already watching, and they allowed me to get as close as 2 meters from them. I refilled the feeder, stood to the side a couple of meters with the camera, and this time the blue jays came, and they came, and they came. They showed no hesitation, nor shyness, nor any fear around me whatsoever. They didn't even bother paying attention to my doings. A dozen blue jays had gathered, sharing food occasionally, though only briefly bickering among themselves for position, and treating me as if I belonged among them. It was a truly joyous feeling. For nearly an hour I stayed there capturing footage. All around me, the woods still waking, and as the day grew warmer, coming out of its winter torpor. Upon the trees I could hear the loud tapping of pileated woodpeckers, and the raucous caws of foraging ravens. And I paused a few minutes, turning the camera in that direction to capture the audio. But I was most delighted to see that as I hiked out, the blue jays followed me, as if escorting me, and if a red squirrel happened to be on a tree they wanted to perch on, they soon moved him along. I think now I'm a blue jay friend. I like the sound of that.